She hadn't smiled in months, but that morning something told her to open the curtains. The light came in like a quiet guest, soft, golden, and kind enough not to startle the dust dancing in the air. It carried with it the scent of October morning, damp leaves sweetening as they turned to earth, the faint mineral smell of dew on concrete, and somewhere distant, someone's coffee brewing, dark and promising. Eleanor hadn't planned to open them. Most mornings she kept the world shut out, the sunlight, the noise, even the mail piling up in the brass box Harold had painted green the summer their grandson was born. The box still needed a touch-up on the left corner, where rust bloomed like a small, persistent question. But today felt different. She couldn't explain why. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Can you remember the last time you did something small that changed your whole day? Maybe you opened a window. Maybe you said yes when you usually said no. Hold that feeling. We're going to need it. The house was the sort that holds a family's whole story. 3 front windows with wavy glass that made the world outside look like it was underwater, a porch that creaked in D-flat like an old friend clearing their throat, and a birdbath in the yard with a thin ring of ice that never seemed to melt all the way, even when March promised spring was really, truly coming this time. After Harold passed, rooms kept their shape but lost their purpose. The lazy boy became a monument no one sat in. The kitchen table, scarred with 40 years of homework, tax returns, and anniversary cake, now held only her placemat, 1 mug, and the salt shaker she'd stopped bothering to refill. The television murmured to itself, keeping company with the wallpaper's faded roses. The hallway borrowed the night's echo and kept it till morning, when the refrigerator's hum would finally break the spell. Yet there she stood, one hand on the curtain, blue cotton, sun-faded to the color of forget-me-nots, the other wrapped around a mug gone cold. The coffee inside had a skin on it, that thin membrane that forms when you've been standing still too long. Across the street, a little boy in a striped shirt tossed a red ball, the kind that bounces with authority, leaving a small smell of rubber in the air. A golden retriever chased after it, tail wagging like it believed joy was still possible, still real, still worth the effort of 4 galloping paws on wet grass. Eleanor smiled without meaning to. It was small, barely there, a muscle memory from a former self, but it surprised her enough to whisper, "Well, look at that." Her voice sounded strange in the empty room, not bad strange, just present, like finding a photograph you'd forgotten you'd taken. The phone rang. May, her daughter, calling from Ohio, where the autumn came 2 weeks earlier and smelled like apples instead of chrysanthemums. "Hi, Mom, how are you holding up?" Eleanor gave her usual answer, the one she'd practiced until it sounded true. "I'm fine, dear. The leaves are turning. Mrs. Whitaker brought by a casserole, tuna, I think, or chicken. They all taste the same under enough cream of mushroom." She wasn't fine, but she was getting good at sounding like she was. May had her own life, her own weight to carry. 2 teenagers who couldn't find their shoes, a husband who traveled, a job that demanded she smile through budget cuts and passive-aggressive emails. "You eating?" May asked in the voice mothers learn and daughters inherit. "Every day," Eleanor said, which was true. She didn't mention the portions had shrunk to the size of a child's fist, or that most nights she ate standing at the counter, staring at the backyard where Harold's tomato steaks leaned like old men, waiting for a bus that wasn't coming. After the call, she noticed a piece of mail she hadn't opened, wedged between the electric bill and a coupon for denture cream that made her feel seen in the worst way. Not a bill this time. A glossy flyer, the kind printed on cardstock that costs extra. Seniors for Seniors, it read in cheerful letters that looked hand-drawn but weren't. Find your perfect match, an older dog who needs a home. The photo showed a gray-muzzled black Labrador with eyes like evening, warm, patient, softly lit from within, holding the kind of wisdom that comes only from having loved someone and lost them, and survived it anyway. Eleanor almost laughed, a sound like a rusted gate opening for the first time in months. Two old souls under one roof, she murmured. What could go wrong? She slid the flyer under her teacup, as if part of her didn't want to tempt hope too openly. Hope was dangerous. Hope required you to get dressed, to leave the house, to risk the possibility that the world might ask something of you that you no longer had the strength to give. Outside, the golden retriever barked, one bright sound that lingered through the open window, like the last note of a song you can't quite remember, but still makes you cry. For the first time in months, Eleanor didn't flinch. She let it settle in the room like a small, brave song. She looked at the flyer again, then at the clock, 1:47 p.m., then at her hands, which had been still for so long they'd forgotten what useful felt like. She put on her coat, the navy wool one that still smelled faintly of Harold's Old Spice because he'd hugged her in it the morning of his last doctor's appointment, and the red scarf May had knit the year the doctor said, "We're going to try our best," which everyone knew meant prepare yourself. Eleanor opened the front door. The porch steps tested her knees with their familiar complaint. The mailbox at the curb kept its little tilt, as if it had a question it was too polite to ask. Inside were a church bulletin printed on paper that smelled like ink and optimism, a coupon for oatmeal, the kind that cooks in 1 minute but tastes like regret, and a second copy of the same shelter flyer. This one had a handwritten note in blue pen, "Quiet hour today, 2-3 p.m. Senior dogs would love to meet you." Someone, probably the young mail carrier with the red beard and kind eyes, had drawn a tiny heart beside the words. Eleanor stood there, flyer in hand, while a school bus hissed to a stop 2 houses down and released a flood of children who smelled like crayons and processed cheese. One of them waved. She waved back, uncertain, but the gesture felt like stretching after a long sleep. She could turn around. She could make tea, the kind in the yellow box that Harold called hot plant water, warm the same soup from yesterday, sit at the same table, watch the same square of sunlight migrate across the same floor. Instead, she tucked the flyer in her pocket and walked. The shelter sat behind the Kroger, where the manager, Rick, late 50s, Red Sox cap, wedding ring worn thin, called her Han, and put aside good peaches in July, the kind that smell like childhood and make your chin sticky. The building was small, brick, with a mural of paw prints leading to the door. Somebody had painted them in all colors, purple, teal, sunshine yellow, and the effect was joyful in a way that didn't apologize for itself. A bell chimed when she opened the door, bright and clean like the kind used in old country stores that sold penny candy in glass jars. The warmth was immediate, like stepping into a hug someone was still learning how to give. The air smelled like cedar shavings, lavender disinfectant, faintly meaty kibble, and beneath it all the elemental scent of dog. Earthy, alive, hopeful. A young woman with freckles scattered like cinnamon across her nose, and a long braid the color of October honey looked up from a clipboard. She wore a sweatshirt that said, "Love is a 4-legged word," and had dirt under her fingernails in a way that said she'd earned it honestly. "Hi there." Her smile was immediate, uncomplicated. "I'm Lila. You came at the perfect time. Quiet hour just started. Are you here for Seniors for Seniors?" Eleanor hesitated, hand still on the door. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, which was true and not true. "That's okay," Lila answered, her voice gentle as a hand on a shoulder. "Want to meet some of our older dogs? No pressure. Sometimes it's just nice to sit with someone who doesn't need you to have all the answers. Think about that for a second. When was the last time someone told you it was okay not to know? Maybe you need to hear that today, too." They walked down a hallway painted with daisies, cheerful, slightly crooked, clearly done by volunteers who cared more about love than precision. The air held the clean smell of dog shampoo, oatmeal scented, the expensive kind, fresh laundry, and something meaty and comforting, like a pot roast just starting to think about being dinner. Soft music played from a speaker, acoustic guitar, the kind without words that gives your thoughts room to breathe. In the first kennel, a terrier with wiry eyebrows dozed with his tongue just peeking out, pink and dignified. In the second, a beagle hummed a low, contemplative note like a cellist tuning before a concert. In the third, a basset hound with ears like velvet curtains opened one eye, assessed Eleanor with the gravity of a judge, and went back to sleep. In the fourth kennel, a Labrador whose coat had once been jet black and now was gently salted, gray at the muzzle, around the eyes, dusting his paws like powdered sugar, sat waiting, not begging, not pacing, just present. His name card read, Baxter, 12 years, calm, loyal, likes cheese, good with people who need someone steady. Lila lowered her voice in the way people do when they speak about someone they love. He came 2 months ago. His owner passed away. The family couldn't take him. Allergies, small apartment. He was confused at first. Wouldn't eat for 3 days, just sat by the kennel door like he was waiting for someone to come back. Eleanor's throat tightened, tender, sore, like the feeling before tears. How can you tell he's better now? Lila smiled softly. Dogs who've known love never stop looking for it. Even when the person isn't there anymore, they keep that hope alive, like a pilot light that never goes out. Eleanor blinked hard. May I sit with him? They brought Baxter to a small room painted the color of sky after rain, a braided rug that smelled like lavender sachets, a wooden rocking chair with a quilt folded over the arm, a basket of clean blankets, and a window that looked out onto a small yard where sparrows argued over a feeder shaped like a little red barn. Baxter entered the room like a gentleman entering a library, respectful, unhurried. He sniffed the baseboards once, noting that another dog had been there recently. He investigated the door twice, his wet nose leaving a small print on the wood. Then he came to Eleanor like someone approaching a shoreline after a long voyage, careful, earnest, carrying hope like a fragile thing. He rested his chin on her knee. The weight was slight but solid, real. He let out a long sigh that seemed to say, I am here. I will not make this complicated. I will not ask for more than you can give. Eleanor laid her palm over his head. His fur was coarser than she'd expected, but warm, holding the ghost of sunshine, the memory of being loved, the faint scent of the baby shampoo they'd used to bathe him. Hello, she said, and her voice cracked like ice on a March pond. Baxter's eyes drifted closed, not from sleep, but from trust. The kind of trust that says, you don't have to be strong right now. I'll hold the space. Something in Eleanor shifted, like a window eased open on the first warm day, letting in air that smells like possibility. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time moved differently in that small room, the way it does in hospitals and churches and anywhere people go to remember how to be human. Lila appeared in the doorway, quiet as a thought. You don't have to decide anything today, she murmured. We offer a 2-week trial. We call it a sleepover. We send you home with everything, food, bowls, bed leash. You only have to bring your voice. My voice? For his name, Lila smiled, and to tell him he belongs. The word belong floated in the room and looked for somewhere to land. Eleanor's hand trembled on Baxter's head. He leaned into it just enough. All right, she said, her voice barely a thread. A sleepover. The walk home took longer than the walk there, and not because of age. Baxter's pace matched hers without being taught, slowing at curbs, pausing when she paused, glancing up at passing cars as if to ask, Are we doing this? Is it safe to be hopeful? Each time he looked up, Eleanor gave a little more slack on the leash, as if loosening something inside herself, too. The afternoon smelled like wood smoke and distant rain. Somewhere someone was baking bread, yeast and warmth and the promise that good things still happened in ordinary kitchens. A neighbor Eleanor didn't know well, a man in his 70s with suspenders and a newspaper tucked under his arm, paused on his porch. "Handsome fellow you got there." "Thank you," Eleanor said, and felt the words settle in her chest like stones in a river, smoothing over time. At the house, Baxter made a gentle circuit. Living room, noting the indent in the lazy boy. Dining room, pausing at the table leg where someone had once spilled something and never quite scrubbed it all away. Kitchen, where the linoleum was worn soft in front of the sink and smelled faintly of lemon pledge and old coffee. He paused at the hallway and looked back for permission. "Go on," she said softly. He walked down the hall, past the bathroom with its pink tiles and lavender soap, past the linen closet that still held Harold's scent on unwashed towels, and stopped at the bedroom doorway. He sniffed, looked back at Eleanor, sniffed again. Then he returned quickly, as if he understood that tender places need permission twice. He found the rug by the front door, woven in blues and greens like a lake in summer. He circled with the deliberateness of an old soul choosing the exact right spot and lowered himself with a soft grunt, the sound of comfort remembering its name. Eleanor stood in the hallway watching him. "Well," she whispered to the empty air, "here we are." That night Eleanor expected to lie awake listening for unfamiliar noises, the click of nails on hardwood, the jingle of tags, the breath of another living being in her space. But the new sound in the room was a steady exhale, Baxter's breathing, punctuated by little whistles as he fell asleep, a rhythm like a train in the far distance or waves meeting a shore. At 2 a.m., when she woke by habit, the same hour Harold used to wake for water, for the bathroom, for one last check that the doors were locked, Eleanor lay still. The house felt less like a bowl for echoes and more like a place where two living beings rested and trusted the dark together. She heard Baxter shift, heard him sigh, heard him settle again, and she slept. "Let me ask you something. When did you stop believing that small things could save you? I'm not talking about miracles. I'm talking about a warm mug, a kind word, the sound of someone or something breathing nearby. Maybe it's time to believe again." Morning arrived carrying purpose, quiet but clear. Feed him, walk him, say his name. Eleanor rose before the sun, a habit from 50 years of packing lunches and finding lost permission slips. She measured kibble into a bowl Lila had sent home, with a note. "Baxter prefers breakfast at 7 a.m., but he's flexible if you sleep in. He believes in grace." Baxter ate with polite enthusiasm, his tail thumping a slow metronome against the cabinet. Thump, thump, thump. A sound that felt like applause for simply showing up. They ventured to the mailbox. He didn't pull. He simply walked like he'd been trained to match his person's pace, understanding that speed wasn't the point, connection was. The box held nothing but a flyer for gutter cleaning, but the walk held plenty. A neighbor's nod, a patch of sun warming the sidewalk, a cardinal landing on the fence with a flash of red so bright it felt like punctuation. Eleanor felt the leash in her hand, leather worn soft, sturdy, useful, alive. "We did it," she told Baxter. "We went to the mailbox." He wagged. It was enough. On Thursday, May called. "How's my favorite lady?" Eleanor told her about the sleepover, after talking about the weather, cool, but the kind that makes you want to bake something, oatmeal coupons, 2 for 1, a small victory, and how the bird bath looked less frozen now that October was thinking about becoming November. "I have a guest," she said, the word tasting strange and sweet. "His name is Baxter. He's 12. He's companionable." The word fit her mouth like a spoon that belonged in her own drawer. May's happiness was the careful, bright kind, the sound of someone who's been worried and is now, tentatively, allowing herself not to be. "Oh, Mom, does it feel like a lot?" Eleanor looked at Baxter, asleep in a square of sunlight, his paws twitching as he chased something in a dream. "It feels like a heartbeat," she said, "in the right way." She didn't say the truer thing out loud, that for the first time since Harold's chair went empty, the house felt like it was holding its breath in anticipation instead of grief. Weeks turned into months. November arrived with frost that made the grass crunch underfoot and breath visible in the morning air, small clouds of proof that you were still here, still breathing, still showing up. December brought early darkness and the smell of fireplaces, and Baxter's first Christmas with her. She bought him a red collar with a small bell that jingled softly when he walked, and he tolerated it with the dignity of someone who understood that love sometimes came wrapped in minor indignities. By January, when the world turned gray and quiet, Eleanor realized she hadn't just survived the holidays, she'd participated in them. She'd baked cookies for the church bake sale. She'd sent cards. She'd even hosted May and the grandkids for New Year's. And Baxter had supervised the chaos with the patience of a seasoned diplomat. And then came spring, real spring, not the false starts of March, but the genuine article that arrives in April with daffodils and that particular smell of earth, remembering how to be soft again. Baxter developed dignified habits, as if he'd been holding them in reserve for the day he could use them again. He preferred to walk on the outside of the sidewalk, slightly ahead, as if to meet the world first on her behalf. He waited while she tied her shoe, patient as a saint. He put 2 paws gently on the threshold of the bedroom each morning, and never crossed unless invited, understanding that some rooms hold ghosts who deserve respect. When her hand shook while pouring tea, the tremor the doctor said was just age, or stress, or the accumulation of doing everything alone. Baxter stationed himself close enough that if she stumbled, she'd land on something soft. The laughter that escaped her then, unexpected, light like silver bells, had somewhere to land. Routine became a quiet quilt, each day a square, breakfast, leash, mailbox, the maple bench at the corner, a conversation of little things that carried big ones. "That house used to have a lilac bush," she told him one morning, pointing across the street. "Could scent the whole month of May. We'll check if they planted another." Baxter's ears swiveled toward her voice. "Harold loved the sound ice makes in a glass," she said another day, pausing by the corner store. "Isn't it funny? We collect love in the smallest noises, the click of his wedding ring on the counter, the way he hummed off key in the shower." Baxter listened the way only a dog can, eyes soft, ears tuned to her breath as much as to her words, understanding that sometimes talking isn't about answers. Eleanor began to hum in the kitchen. The tune didn't belong to any song she knew. It lived somewhere between lemon dish soap and morning light slanting through the window above the sink. She wrote small lists on a notepad she kept by the salt shaker, titled "Things We Did Today," fed Baxter, watered the roses, heard a cardinal, laughed at his sneeze. Once she wrote, "Cried while washing a bowl." Baxter sat with me on the floor and didn't judge. She drew a tiny star next to it, because bravery deserved celebration, even when it was quiet. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Whitaker, 83, purple coat, opinion on everything, stopped at the porch one morning in early May. "Ellie, who is this handsome gentleman?" "This is Baxter," Eleanor said, and the name felt like a little flame she was learning to carry without burning herself. "He's from the shelter. He likes cheese and doesn't judge my cooking." "Don't we all?" Mrs. Whitaker grinned, lowering a gnarled hand to the air near Baxter's ear, blessing him without bothering him. "I had a beagle once, got me through my Jerry's passing, then through knee surgery. That dog's patience taught me how to be still without feeling useless." She straightened, wincing slightly. "Welcome, sir," she told Baxter. "You take good care of my friend." The mail carrier, red beard, kind eyes, always wore a different hat, offered the back of his hand for Baxter to sniff. "Afternoon, Baxter. Afternoon, ma'am. Fine day to practice happiness." Eleanor smiled. A real one this time, the kind that uses muscles she'd forgotten she had. "We're out of practice," she admitted, "but we're learning." "Best kind of learning," he said, tipping his hat today, a knit cap with a pom-pom, the kind you do a little bit every day until suddenly you've gotten good at it without noticing. At church, Denise, choir director, fierce hugger, maker of legendary lemon bars, slipped Eleanor a foil-wrapped square and a look that said, "I see you, and I'm proud. Come sit with me," she whispered. During the hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness," Eleanor found her voice again, softer than before, rustier, but steady. She sang the alto line, the one that holds the middle, the one that doesn't soar but doesn't falter either. On the drive home, the car felt less empty. She spoke out loud to Harold's memory, the way you talk to an old photograph. "You would have liked him," she said. "He has your patience. And he snores, but quieter, more dignified." She laughed. It counted. On a rainy Tuesday in June that smelled like wet asphalt and earthworms, Eleanor bought a little blue raincoat for Baxter at the pet store that used to be a hardware store and still smelled faintly of sawdust. "Handsome?" the woman behind the counter assured her. Baxter looked mildly offended when she put it on him, ears angled like soft sails, expression dignified and vaguely betrayed, but he wore it without protest, because love sometimes means wearing ridiculous things to make someone happy. Eleanor took a picture and mailed it with a note written on the back of a grocery receipt. "Turns out I needed a roommate who likes naps and doesn't care that I talk to myself. Love, Mom," May called that night, laughter thick with relief. "He looks like a gentleman, late for a very important meeting." "He takes his job very seriously," Eleanor said. "Chief of Security, Inspector of Squirrels, Vice President of Emotional Support." "Sounds like a full-time position." "It is," Eleanor said quietly, "and I'm grateful for the work." They learned their block's weather like a favorite radio station. Which sidewalks puddled, which maples promised early shade, which porch smelled like coffee at 9 a.m. Millie, the young shepherd next door, all legs and enthusiasm, adored Baxter, bringing him a squeaky toy each afternoon to the dignified old Labrador who had seen it all. Baxter's response was a paternal huff that translated easily to, "I'm happy for you, child." And sometimes I remember that energy. Eleanor started waving to people, not just neighbors she knew, but strangers. The woman who power-walked in neon pink, the teenager who skateboarded to school, the man who fed the ducks even though the sign said not to. She became a landmark, the lady with the old dog, the one who always smiles now. On evenings when the sky pressed low and her chest did too, when grief arrived like weather, uninvited and inevitable, Eleanor sat on the floor by Baxter's bed, her back against the chair. She told him the day's small truths. I thought of him when the spoon tapped the side of the cup. Same sound. Every morning for 43 years. Drove me crazy sometimes. Now I'd pay money to hear it. Thump, Baxter's tail. I didn't cry at the market today when I walked past the peaches. I bought 2. That felt brave. Thump, thump. I changed the sheets and made the room smell like lemon. That was hard. But good. Baxter put his paw on her slipper. Careful. Declarative. "I hear you. You're not alone." Once, late on a summer night when the air smelled like cut grass and distant rain, Baxter thanked her. She felt it, clear as language, quieter than words. He rested his graying muzzle near hers and let out a breath that carried gratitude, the kind that fills a room gently, like light arriving at the exact right angle. Eleanor closed her eyes and received it. "You're welcome," she whispered. "Thank you, too." Summer deepened, slower, kinder. smelling like honeysuckle and freshly watered gardens. Eleanor's lists grew longer. Folded towels, sang at choir, laughed at nothing, saw first fireflies, made potato salad, called May just to talk, listened to Baxter dream. She added a new page titled, Things I Want to See Again. First quiet snow. May with basil stuck in her teeth. Light in the hallway at 7 p.m. Baxter's tale, When I Say His Name. Hope did not knock loudly. It kept choosing the small door. The shelter called to check in. Lila's voice carried a smile. How's our gentleman? More gentleman every day, Eleanor said, watching Baxter supervise her ironing. He has opinions about my technique. I always suspected he had management potential, Lila laughed. Listen, if you ever need help, nail trims, medications, anything, we have a senior care team. This is meant to be a joy, not a burden. It is, Eleanor said, even when it tugs a little, like stretching a muscle you haven't used in a while. Hurts at first. Then you remember you're stronger than you thought. By late August, Baxter slowed. Time, courteous but firm, made its rounds. Walks became shorter, porch to shade tree to water bowl. Eleanor learned new signals. His careful paw lift that meant rest, please. The heavier lean that meant I'm still with you, but I'm tired. She placed a second bed by her reading chair, orthopedic, the kind that cradles old bones. He chose between closeness and comfort, depending on the day's weather. When he startled himself awake with an undignified snore and shot upright, looking offended by his own body, Eleanor laughed so hard she had to sit down on the kitchen floor. "Oh, my friend," she wheezed, wiping her eyes, "aren't we something?" She wrote that one down, too. Laughed until I cried. Baxter bemused. We're both ridiculous. Excellent day. And then came a day in early September when the air changed, a softness with a thread of goodbye woven through it. The vet, Dr. Patel, a woman with silver hair and cheerful shoes covered in cartoon cats, examined Baxter with reverence. "He's an old man," she said, rubbing his shoulder, "and an excellent one. We can keep him comfortable, pain meds, joint supplements. But when the day feels too tall for him to climb, you call me. I'll come to your home. He won't be scared." Eleanor drove the long way back, past the pond where ducks pulled little V's in the water, past the corner store, past a house with a door painted the color of rain. Baxter lifted his head as their street approached. Home announced itself in the light through their particular trees. That afternoon it rained the friendly kind, soft, persistent, the type that makes you want soup and a blanket. Eleanor made chicken noodle from scratch, carrots, celery, the smell of broth saying you're cared for. She chopped vegetables and listened to the knife, certain and ordinary. Baxter dozed by her feet. She tasted the broth and thought, this is good. I made something good. 2 bowls, one for soup, one for him, cooled and safe, carried warmth to the living room. They ate together. It was a Tuesday. It was perfect. Here's what I want you to think about tonight before you go to sleep. What are you waiting for permission to do? To get a dog? To call an old friend? To open the curtains? To forgive yourself? What if you just did it tomorrow? Some endings, when they arrive, are not thunder but a lantern, carried carefully across a room. The day came in late September, gentle, certain, full of love. Eleanor called Lila, who came and held her hand. Denise arrived with tissues and silence, the kind of friendship that doesn't need words. May drove through the night, hair unbrushed, heart open. Dr. Patel's cheerful shoes moved quietly. Her hands were steady and kind. Eleanor lay on the floor with Baxter, cheek to fur that smelled like sunshine and years and every walk they'd ever taken together. "You were my second spring," she whispered. "You brought the light back in pieces small enough to carry. You taught me it was okay to be happy again, that it wasn't betrayal, that love makes room. Baxter placed his head in her palm, the way he had the very first day, in that quiet room, and did not look away. His eyes said, "Thank you. You saved me too." When the house fell quiet again, it did not become a bowl. It became a home with love in it, blankets that remembered, bowls that had served, nose prints at the bottom of the window like signatures on a guest book. Grief came as it does, same weather, different season, but inside it, steady and small, a light. That night, Eleanor opened her notebook and, with a hand that trembled, wrote, "We said goodbye. We held each other. Love remains. It always does." She drew a star. October returned, painting the trees in fire. Eleanor decorated a small memorial corner in the living room. Baxter's blue raincoat folded carefully on the chair, his favorite squeaky toy, the one Millie had brought that first week, which he'd carried around like a trophy, and a framed photo May had taken in the spring, Baxter in a patch of sunlight, eyes closed, completely at peace. She hung his collar on the hook by the door, not hidden away in a drawer, but visible. Some things are meant to stay where you can see them, not because you can't move on, but because you choose to move forward with them. Love doesn't require forgetting. It requires remembering well. She made tea, hummed in the kitchen, and let the house breathe. The choir welcomed her back the first Sunday in November. The sanctuary smelled like pine boughs being set up for the holidays, candle wax, and old hymnals, the scent of 1,000 prayers spoken by 1,000 voices. Her voice, never loud, never the one that carried the melody, wove through stronger lines like thread, holding a shape for others to lean on. Denise squeezed her hand during the sermon, said nothing, didn't need to. Winter came softly that year. Eleanor decorated a small tree with ornaments that meant something. Paper stars May had made in second grade, edges softened by time. A tiny wooden dog Harold had bought at a roadside stand in Vermont. A red ribbon from the bouquet he'd brought when he proposed, preserved in a shoebox for 44 years because some things are too important to throw away. She added a new ornament this year, a small ceramic paw print she'd found at a craft fair, painted in shades of blue and gold. She hung it on the branch that caught the morning light. On a snow-bright morning in early February, just over a year since she'd opened the curtains and smiled without meaning to, Eleanor woke before dawn and stood at the window with her mug. The street wore a hush that made you speak softly, the kind of quiet that feels sacred because it's full of possibility, of memory, of the tender space between what was and what might be. Snow covered everything in that particularly blue light that comes just before sunrise, when the world looks like it's holding its breath. "Good morning, old friends," she whispered to the air, to Baxter's memory, to Harold's ghost, to the version of herself who'd learned how to be brave in small increments. She did not feel foolish. The shelter sent a card in a cream envelope with a paw print stamp, a photo of Baxter from months before, sitting in the sunlight with his dignified expression, eyes steady and gracious. On the back, Lila's handwriting, "Thank you for giving him home." He gave it right back. Some dogs teach us how to love again. Baxter was one of the great teachers. We're honored you chose each other. Eleanor moved the card around for days. Mantel, bedside table, kitchen windowsill, so the light could visit it from different directions, the way you turn a prism to see all its colors. A week later, while looking for her recipe for oatmeal cookies, the kind with walnuts and just enough cinnamon to make the house smell like purpose, she found the old flyer under her recipe box. Seniors for Seniors. The paper was soft now, handled and folded enough times to feel like fabric. She traced the title with her finger, running over each letter like reading Braille. The thought that came was not disloyal, not a betrayal. It arrived like a new candle lit from an old flame, the wick catching, the light steady, both fires burning at once. Love isn't a single room you lock when you leave. It's a house with many lamps. Lighting one doesn't extinguish the others. It just makes the whole place brighter. She put on her coat, the navy wool one that now carried the scent of a year's worth of walks through all 4 seasons. She wrapped May's red scarf around her neck. She walked to the shelter. The bell chimed. Same bright sound, different season. The daisy hallway, the smell of cedar and hope. Lila looked up from her clipboard, braid over one shoulder, freckles like constellations. Her eyes widened, then softened with understanding. "Eleanor," she breathed. And then, because she was the kind of person who understood things without being told, who'd learned to read grief and hope in equal measure, she said only, "Would you like to visit the quiet room?" Eleanor nodded, throat too full for words. They walked past the kennels, the terrier, the beagle, humming his dignified note, the basset hound, still judging, still napping. In the 5th kennel, a different space, but the same kind of waiting, a brindle-coated lady with white eyelashes like frost on windows watched the world with careful hope. She was smaller than Baxter, more delicate, but she held herself with the same quiet dignity, the same understanding that life had been complicated and might be again, but that didn't mean you stopped showing up. The card read, Mabel, 10 years. Shy at first, loyal, likes warm places and soft voices. Good with people who understand that trust takes time. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the ache. Lila knelt by the kennel, offering Mabel the back of her hand through the bars. Mabel sniffed once, twice, then offered the smallest tail wag, a question mark, maybe, I want to believe, but I've been disappointed before. "She came with a letter from her person," Lila said softly. "A woman named Ruth, 78, who had to move in with her daughter to help care for Ruth's own mother, advanced dementia. The daughter has a no-dog lease and 3 cats who made it clear a dog wasn't welcome." Lila's voice caught, steadied. Ruth wrote, "Mabel has been my companion through a mastectomy, through losing my husband, through learning how to live alone and finding out I was braver than I thought. She's shy until she isn't. Then she's the most loyal soul you'll ever meet. She likes to sit close, but not on you. She snores. She has opinions about bedtime. She will love you if you're patient enough to let her." The word hung in the air between them, warm and familiar. Eleanor's eyes burned. "May I sit with her?" They brought Mabel to the quiet room, the braided rug, the rocking chair, the window with its view of sparrows still arguing, still surviving, still choosing to sing even when the world was cold. For 2 full minutes, Mabel stood by the door, living inside her hesitation, like it was a house she'd built herself, brick by brick, to keep safe. Eleanor understood. She'd lived in that house, too. "It's all right," she said quietly, making herself small in the chair, hands in her lap, voice gentle as a hand on a cheek. "You don't have to trust me yet. We can just sit here. That's enough." Mabel's ears swiveled, listening, deciding. Then she walked forward, slow, testing each step like walking on ice you're not sure will hold, and placed one paw delicately on the toe of Eleanor's shoe, a question, a promise, a maybe. "Hello," Eleanor said, and something answered inside her, steady, familiar, brave, something that said, "You can do this again. You can survive loving something that won't last forever. You can choose hope even when you know how the story ends. Because the middle parts, the walks, the quiet mornings, the sound of breathing in the dark, those are worth it." She reached out her hand, waited. Mabel sniffed, considered, then stepped close enough that Eleanor could feel the warmth of her, the realness, the particular miracle of another beating heart, willing to take a chance on connection. Eleanor's hand settled on Mabel's head. Different texture than Baxter's fur, a different pattern of gray, a different story, but just as real, just as worthy, just as capable of bringing light into a room that had learned to live in shadows. "Would you like to come home with me?" Eleanor whispered. "Just for a little while. A sleepover. We'll see how it goes." Mabel leaned into her hand. Barely, but enough. Yes. She signed the sleepover paperwork slowly, her handwriting shakier than it used to be, but still legible, still hers. Lila folded the leash into Eleanor's palm like passing a ribbon, a baton, a torch. "Welcome home," she whispered to Mabel. Then, to Eleanor, "Welcome back." The February air outside felt less like winter's end and more like the first sip of something warm you didn't know you needed until it touched your tongue. Coffee with cream, soup after a long day, the particular warmth of hope after a season of cold. At home, Eleanor gave Mabel the tour, her voice gentle and sure. "Here is the rug where another good soul used to sleep. His name was Baxter. You can choose this spot or choose somewhere else. Both are fine. He wouldn't mind sharing." Mabel sniffed the rug carefully, reading its history like a book written in scent. "Here is your bowl, the blue one. It was loved before. It will be loved again. Here is the chair where I read. You can sit nearby if you want company, or in the other room if you want peace. And here," she touched the hook by the door, where Baxter's collar still hung. "Here is a place where important things belong. When we get you a collar, yours will hang here too. I'm thinking red, or maybe green. We'll see what suits you." Mabel looked up at her, brown eyes holding questions Eleanor couldn't answer yet, but would learn to in time. That night, Mabel circled 3 times at the foot of the bed, an ancient ritual, a prayer to invisible gods of comfort and safety, and curled into a comma, small and warm and cautiously hopeful. Eleanor woke at 2 a.m. by old habit, but she didn't pace the hallway, didn't stand at the window cataloging losses, didn't count the ways her life had changed. She lay still, hand resting on the blanket, feeling the small warmth at the end of the bed, like a nightlight for the heart. "I'm still here," she whispered, not to the dark, not to the ghosts, but to herself. "I'm still here. And that's enough. And tomorrow I'll be here again. And that will be enough, too." In the morning, the notebook opened to a new page. Eleanor wrote, fed Mabel. Walked to mailbox, slowly. She's nervous of trucks. Listened to snow hush the street like a lullaby. Remembered how to be brave. It's okay to be slow. It's okay to start again. Love doesn't run out. It multiplies. She drew a star, then another smaller one beside it. "Let me ask you one more thing before we finish. What's your second spring going to be? Maybe it's not a dog. Maybe it's a garden, a class, a phone call you've been putting off, a dream you thought you were too old for. What if age isn't about closing doors? It's about choosing which new ones to open. You don't have to decide today, but maybe think about it tomorrow, and the day after that, until one morning you wake up and realize you've already started." Outside Eleanor's window, the birdbath blinked away its thin ring of ice, revealing clear water underneath, cold but clean, ready for the cardinals and sparrows who would come at first light. Across the street, the little boy had a bigger bike now and fewer wobbles. He rode in wider circles, braver than before. The golden retriever was older too, grayer at the muzzle, slower in the legs, but still believed in red balls, in open windows, in the possibility that someone might choose joy just because they could. Eleanor stood at her window and opened the curtains wide. Let the light in, golden, kind, patient. She kept choosing. Not because loneliness never visited anymore, it did. Some days it stayed for breakfast. Not because grief had packed its bags and left, it hadn't. It lived in the house now, a permanent guest who sometimes sat quietly and sometimes needed to be held. But because she knew now, bone deep and certain, that the smallest acts, opening a curtain, holding a leash, saying a name, choosing to show up for another living being, could invite light back into the room in pieces small enough to carry. And when the porch light clicked on that evening, Eleanor's hand steady on the switch, Mabel watching from the rug with curious eyes, the house breathing around them both like a living thing, it wasn't to push away the dark. It was to say, quietly and clearly, to herself and to anyone who needed to hear it, welcome home. You belong here. Love makes room, and it's never too late to start again. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever needed permission to start again, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this, true ones, hopeful ones, ones that remind us it's never too late to open the curtains. Hit that like button if Eleanor's journey felt like yours. And leave a comment telling me, what's your second spring going to be? I read every single one, and your story might be the one that helps someone else take that first brave step. See you in the next story. Until then, keep choosing the light.